Okay, well, hi. This is Jim McKelvey, and today I thought I'd share a conversation between myself and Jeff Mazur. And Jeff is the executive director of LaunchCode. For those of you who don't know, LaunchCode is a nonprofit that I founded 6 or 7 years ago now to address the shortage of programming talent in the United States. And it has evolved to be a company with its own innovation stack. It's actually doing some really amazing stuff. And it's different from a boot camp. So everyone thinks that LaunchCode is like some, coding school. Um, and we kind of are, but it's sort of the same way as Square's a credit card company. LaunchCode does things uh, quite different from other boot camps. Most notably, we emphasize job placement. So we don't consider your education finished until you get a job. So it's not one of these things where you come in, you pay us money, and we hand you a slip of paper and say, okay, good luck. You now have some weird certification. What LaunchCode does is we basically work with employers to find out exactly what they want. We then essentially teach to the job needs of the market. So we're constantly creating new classes. And then the final innovation, well, not the final innovation, but like one of the things that also makes LaunchCode unique is it's completely free. And because it's free, we have tremendous demand for our classes. Um, and our classes are not entirely online, or at least they weren't entirely online. So we've had this problem at LaunchCode where literally thousands of people will compete for hundreds of seats in our classroom. And it's a great model. We don't want to start charging for our education. And we like the fact that people, get into a room and help each other. Um, but we can't let them in that room anymore. So LaunchCode's going through some, pretty strange days indeed. So this is Jeff. He's our executive director. And I think I just, sort of like to start off with a super high level question, which is, Jeff, if your business is training people for free,
Right.
uh, how do you keep the lights on? Like,
Yeah,
like what's the business model behind LaunchCode? Because
for
it's a
sure.
nonprofit.
Right. And you mentioned before what the business model isn't, and that's not charging people up front to learn. And we think that one of the key innovations of LaunchCode is that when you have this environment where employers have such a great need for people who have this skill set, that the need is so great in most instances that they will pay for people who have this skill. And that's really the business model that LaunchCode has developed. How do you find people that would have been probably shut out from learning these skills via the typical model if they had to pay money for it, but who are a really good fit for the jobs, and give them skills for free, give them skills quickly, get them in front of an employer who will say, in many instances, this person is great, and I'm going to pay you now to have the privilege of bringing that person onto my team, working with them for a little bit, and ultimately making them a permanent part of my team. And so, you look at LaunchCode, and when you look at all of the many um, uh, engagements that we have with employers over time, we're now to a point where when you look at our operating budget, what it costs us to run all our programs and just to operate each year, we covered nearly all of that cost with that earned revenue stream from employers, which is really great. It's amazing that you had this idea, Jim, that you could do this thing entirely differently, open up this world to a whole new realm of people, give them these skills and give them these opportunities for free, and find a revenue stream that covers all or nearly all of the costs to do that. So that's pretty remarkable. That's the business model. But we are a nonprofit, so at the same time that we are generating that earned revenue stream through employer-paid funds, we're also raising money from corporate foundations and philanthropic foundations and individuals because we know we're providing that education for free, and so we want to amplify the number of opportunities we have to get people in those doors. So we want to raise that money so we can constantly bring more and more people into this circuit, into the top of that funnel. So that's what we've built, and it's amazing. It's 2,100 people now over the course of the 6.5 years that the organization has been in existence who've started their careers in technology by virtue of LaunchCode, which is, I
So
think,
2,100
remarkable.
people have gotten tech jobs because LaunchCode trained them and
Yes.
placed them. Wow. Okay. Um, so what is the thing that's keeping LaunchCode from doing 20,000? Like,
Yeah. So if you asked me that question in January, I would have given you a different answer than I'll give
Okay,
you
well, give me
in
both answers.
in mid-April. So the really hard part of this, I suspect, like many businesses and operations, is just getting in front of enough employers who have the need to share this valuable thing that you have. Once employers are accustomed to LaunchCode and understand how the model works, they find it to be an incredibly powerful tool for building a pipeline of junior tech talent into their organization. But it is a high cost and high friction enterprise to get in front of the right companies, to get in front of the right people at the right companies, and then to get them bought in enough on the front end to take the first person and the second person, so that then they see how powerful this can be. And so, I think one of our challenges has always been, how do we reach out more? How do we grow further? How do we touch the people out there in the corporate world that are hiring in a way that will allow us to grow in that way? Now obviously the challenges that existed previously are still there. You just have this additional hurdle, which is when we look across the landscape and see what's happening in tech hiring at this very moment, and given all of the economic uncertainty. I saw an economist from Indeed post on Twitter this week that job postings across all industries and job types are down across the board, obviously, but even software developer, 18% down in terms of postings that they've seen from what they would typically expect right now. So, jobs are employers are more reticent to hire at this point.
Let's drill down on that. So
Mhm.
18% drop in job postings for programmers, which we know is a super hot area.
Mhm.
Do you think that 18% drop means that we're going to have trouble getting people jobs, or that there's still more jobs than people with this
I think
skill
there's
set?
still more jobs than people. Look, I
Okay.
think part of this is,
Because
I
we
I
had,
think part of this is,
I remember we had a massive shortfall,
sure. Right. When you
and
look
now
at,
we have like a less massive shortfall.
well, so I think
Is that
we should define what we mean by that, right? When we talk, I think we do have this national shortfall of 500,000, 600,000 tech jobs that aren't going to be filled. Now the question is, does this economic moment, for however long it lasts, 3 weeks, 3 months, or God forbid 3 years, mean that the need for those jobs has disappeared? Well, maybe, because they may not get hired today. But when the economy, and the American economy, such as it is, returns to normal, whatever normal means, there is still going to be that need that is there. And so, what I think we have today is a moment where there is, from a situational standpoint, um, more difficulty in getting people jobs at this moment, because employers, many of them, are taking a wait and see approach. Many employers are actively dumping or laying off people. Many people are furloughing contract employees. And so it's a more difficult moment. When we survey the landscape for Q2 at LaunchCode, just with our employer partners, and talk to our people who we're usually working with and say, hey, well, what do you expect? And when we do the math, we say, hey, it looks like the demand that we would usually expect to see in Q2 of 2020 is probably around 30 to 50% of what we would expect it to be, based on assumptions we made previously. So
so?
there
It's down half or three quarters from what.
yeah, half, or yeah, exactly,
So
exactly.
that's a huge drop.
It is. And now we still see employers that are active out there, and by virtue of a combination of their commitment to filling their own need, and LaunchCode's sort of staying with a number of these projects, we see a bunch of projects that we're working with various employers like Microsoft and Comcast, that when this whole thing started to turn, we were uncertain about whether those projects were going to continue, and they are. And so that's a good thing. So we see activity that's happening now, that will yield people going through training programs and getting jobs with these companies, that will land in April and May and June, which is a good thing. So it's not that there's zero activity, but we do see, in terms of this kind of day-to-day activity of job filling for junior software developers, there's just a much more, it's just much softer, and it's a more wait and see approach among many employers.
Okay, so let's take it from the job seeker's perspective. Okay, um, let's say I was just laid off,
Mm-hmm.
which probably applies to tens of millions of people that weren't expecting it. And I always thought that programming would be fun, but I've always had this full-time job, and I've been really busy, and now I'm not too busy, right?
Sure.
Um, but the problem is LaunchCode is an in-person educational model. I mean, you do the lectures online, but then you come into these centers
Mm-hmm.
and you work with your fellow students, and you help the students help each other.
Yes.
And that's what helps us, keep our graduation rate up. And by the way, it allows us to educate at a very low cost
Hmm.
because, we have, we have one Harvard professor who tapes a lecture, and then 10,000 people watch it, and then they get in a room and help each other. So it's a very efficient way to deliver training. But that whole model's shot now. Like you can't put them in the room.
Yes.
So is LaunchCode out of business here? Like have we stopped working? What's the response to keep
Sure.
education going if in fact we're doing that?
Definitely, we are, and it's funny because you think about what is the response, and I think actually what we've found to be the case over the course of the 3.5, 4 weeks since this all kind of came to a head is that it's actually a few different responses. And let me tell you what I mean by that. There is, of course, the instance of we do programming in a number of different places: St. Louis, Kansas City, Tampa, Miami, Philadelphia. We have a class going on right now. But in Kansas City, there was a class that had 1 week left to go, 2 more in-person sessions of the class. And then we said, you know what? It's March 13th. We've got to shut this down. We can't be doing in-person classes, putting 100 people in a room anymore. It's just not going to fly. So in that instance, it was literally, okay, we're going to do essentially the same thing we did as best we can for 2 classroom sessions by using some remote tools like Google Hangouts and what have you. And we got people through the last 2 classes, and they'd hung in for 20 weeks already. So they were going to do whatever they were going to do, no matter how sort of
Yeah.
reduced the quality was for that 1 week, because it's a short time thing. Totally different situation. In St. Louis, we had an LC 101 class that had been going for about 5 or 6 weeks. And so there, it was, okay, we got to keep this thing going. We got to turn it over to remote next week. And it's a good thing. These people already sort of know one another. They've already been in their small TA group, so there's a relationship formed. So that was a good piece. Then it was this struggle. What are the right tools to use? Is it Google Hangout? Is it Zoom? What are the pros and cons of each one? How do we use the paid accounts? Do we have one for each TA who has their small TA group of 8 to 10 people? And so it was very much a process of figuring out how we transition this class from what had already started in the index model and move over to something different, which is hard to do. It's hard to build the plane while you fly it. But it's been largely successful, in part, I think, because of the relationships that had already been developed among the small groups, because of the training we'd already invested in the teaching fellows who could kind of keep things moving. And so, that's now, we've sort of adapted and understand what are the best tools to use for the small group settings. And, understand, like you said, the lecture part of this stuff still works perfectly fine because it's just somebody sitting and watching in a Google Hangout someone give a lecture.
Yeah.
But to understand how our classes work in a typical setting, it is you're a TA and you've got 8 to 10 students, learners who you're responsible for, and you kind of walk around a small table where they're all sitting in a group and they're all working on their own project or working together on solving these problems, and you're looking over the shoulder, right, to kind of see.
Yeah.
Well, no,
Right.
well, I mean, you can't really replicate that via a Zoom a meeting, right? You can try, and there's some tools that walk close up to it, but it's really hard to replicate. So it's figuring that out. And so we did that, and that's proceeding. And then, I think the kind of third deployment scenario that we're still in the process of doing is, okay, what about the class that we opened applications for 2 months ago, and for which 1,030 people have applied? It's supposed to start in April, and they all applied under the auspices of the regular in-person class, right? Because when we
Yeah.
started taking applications, that was the assumption. Now we're going to have to start this class, and it's going to have to start remote. So we're not going to have the benefit of people getting to know one another in person as we did with the last class. We know more about the technology and how that's going to work now, but we said, hey, the reality here is we're not simply taking LC 101 as we know it and converting it over to remote. What we're actually doing here is building what it amounts to an entirely different product, not in terms of
It's
curriculum.
completely different. Like this
The
is,
curriculum doesn't change.
yeah,
Right.
because we tried this
Yes.
at the beginning. So just for a little history lesson
Yeah.
here, I think maybe even before you joined LaunchCode, we thought, oh, this is great. We don't have to have classrooms. We can do everything online. Well, it turns out we couldn't. Like it was a disaster. Now, I will say this, because we had the ability to sort of quickly pivot and shove people in classrooms, and that worked, we didn't really keep refining that innovation stack of how we're going to do remote learning. So we never solved that problem. But now you're in a situation where, like, That's all you got.
Yes.
So you're either
Yeah.
going to solve that problem or you're not going to solve that problem. But
Yes.
we're not going to sit there and sort of say, have this easy alternative, which
Totally.
has been LaunchCode's thing for. So
Well, yes. Well,
so
the
you're
first
going
thing
to
I
get it.
note, yes, I think so. The first thing I note is that I think like that innovation or that whatever that was in that early going actually maybe perversely created what is, I think, one of the key innovations and learnings of the LaunchCode educational model, which is just the critical importance of the small group setting and the development of those relationships with people
Yeah.
that really do help get the non-traditional computer science learner through this class in a way that they might not otherwise if they didn't have
Now,
that. So
when you say non-traditional, I want you to be really specific about our demographics. Like, who are you talking about here?
yeah, so when I say that, I just mean somebody who would have been highly unlikely to have gone through one of the traditional pathways into these jobs, be it a 4-year degree in computer science from a university or college, or somebody who would plunk down 15K to go through a paid boot camp to do some
Okay,
of this stuff.
so if you can't afford college and maybe you didn't study computer science as an undergraduate, you're 30 or 40 or older.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. No, it's
Yeah.
and that's
Okay.
this is overwhelmingly the people who we see
Okay.
successful come in through LaunchCode. The guy who got an English degree, he's 27 years old, he's got 44K left in debt, and he's working 22 hours a week in 2 different low wage or retail jobs. And there is no going back to college to learn some other skill. There's no plunking down 13K for a boot camp. It is LaunchCode because I can do it for free. I don't have to pay any money, and I can do the in-person piece in the evening when it's scheduled and still keep my day job and keep food on the
Okay.
table and keep things going. So, I think if you look at the demos overall over the course of the last year in our programming, it's 52% women. Again, far different from what the demographic looks like in the programmer universe or in the 4-year computer science degree
So
universe.
we have more women than men, and the
Yes,
market has like 90% men.
that's right. It's right. So
Okay.
it's vastly different from what you see. It's 42% people of color. It's people. It's
And wait a second.
60%.
So let's just ground that in the marketplace. People of color in the marketplace, and I'm sorry because these are California statistics, which might not be national, but it's like 5%.
Yeah, and so in St. Louis, if you break down those numbers, if you look at our programming over the course of the last year and a half, it's probably 21 or 22% Black or African American, and the remainder is a mixture. It's South Asian, other ethnicities in there that make up that 42% people of color stat. So our universe of learner looks very different than what the industry looks like, as you
Okay.
noted. And from an economic standpoint, it's 60% people who are earning less than $30,000 a year. So again, people who are not economically situated in a way to invest in their own continuing education or in learning a new skill at this
Okay.
point in their life.
So for people like that, getting in a room with somebody else who just physically looks like them, so they don't feel totally alone, helps a lot. And we can't do that anymore. So what are you doing?
Yeah. So, lots of things to address that particular piece that happened before COVID and that are still happening now that are around how do you build an environment in which people feel as though they belong. They're not the outlier, but the person who belongs there. So those things I think thematically are consistent. We want to continue to connect people with people who have similar backgrounds and experiences through these programs. We can still do that. But I think the key changes in terms of deployment as we think about what does an online LC 101 look like that's different from the LC 101 we were doing before is really just taking a step back and saying, okay, what are the assumptions that no longer hold here? And I think, these things may sound very elementary, but I think they're very important because right now, for the last 4 years, our practice is LC 101 is 20 weeks. That's what it is, right? Well,
Yeah.
you know what? Guess what? It's not that way anymore because what we see from what we've done so far is that it takes about a day longer on average for each person to complete each assignment than it otherwise would have because it's harder to get access to their people. There's more churn. There's more friction in getting the help that they need in order to get through the assignments. And so one of the things we've said is, well, hey, there's no magic to the fact that the class has been 20 weeks over time. We want it to be accelerated. We want it to be as quick as possible, but if adding 1 additional day to the length of the class for each assignment that exists makes a difference in some portion of people and getting through being able to complete this because they're able to get the help they need and what have you, then we think that is something that is not, it doesn't mean the product is a failure. It just means the class is 24 weeks long now instead of 20 weeks. And apart from that, the other piece is like, what are the expectations on the front end? And with regard to this class that was planned to start in St. Louis in April, our assumptions were all, this is what the class is going to be, the normal deployment. There's not going to be any changes. Once we realized, hey, there are going to have to be changes, we need to do a bunch of things on the front end. We need to, besides just sort of changing the course calendar slightly, we also need to do different training for our TAs. We need to set expectations differently at the front end. So we wound up pushing the start of that class back about a month from where it would have started otherwise, so that we can put in place these the new playbook, the new best practices, train our TAs and our instruction staff in a way that's going to be reflective of this new reality. So it's really been about looking at this class through a new prism, understanding that it actually is a different program in meaningful ways than the program we're used to running, and then taking the time to make sure we have all of the we do everything right on the front end, so we're not losing people in the middle because of our own mistakes or because of our own unfamiliarity with what we're doing right now.
Have you changed admission standards at all?
No, not standards. The admission standards continue to be, do you have the aptitude? We use this HackerRank logic reasoning exam to get a sense for, at a baseline, is somebody have the aptitude that generally aligns with being successful in this class? That's still there. We still look at these questions about drive and passion. We don't want somebody doing this. Frankly, we don't want somebody doing this just because, I lost my job at, whatever company just laid me off, and I think this is the best thing to do. We want somebody who's doing this because they're really interested in technology, they're really driven to learn, and they're passionate about the subject matter, because we find those things track very closely with success in a program that is hard to get through. If you don't have that passion, you don't have that drive, it is highly likely that at some point you'll say, you know what, this just isn't worth it. I'm gonna bail out on it. So in all of those ways, I think the admission standards and criteria are the same. Now, like you mentioned at the outset, or a little bit, we are in this unique situation in that because we're doing online programming now, we are bound by fewer things than we would otherwise have been bound by. This class that was supposed to start in April, we were excited about it. It was supposed to be held at the St. Louis Public Library downtown branch, a great auditorium, but we
Yeah.
knew we were going to be able to enroll about 130 people in that class.
And
Now,
that was because there are 130 seats.
exactly, because
Yeah.
we can fit an instruction team and 130 students in there, and that's what capacity dictates. And so we're not bound by that anymore. Now, we're still bound by the reality that we have X amount of teaching fellows that we can ultimately bring in, and we know that the ratio of instruction staff and teaching fellows to students has to remain not wildly different. But because we are unbound from that hard cap of 130, we're going to be able to enroll more people in this cohort than we otherwise would have. I think we recognize that even with all our best efforts, that we do expect retention to be somewhat lower with this class than with a regular class, just because there's so many unknowns, and we know that the online piece is just harder to get through without that in-person setting. But we have the benefit of being able to bring more people in. We're not capped by virtue of physical space. We're just capped by some other considerations, which we can overcome a little bit. We can put a couple more people in a TA group. We can hire a few extra TAs than we otherwise would have, and we can bolster this up from, maybe if it would have been 130, it might be 170 or 175 by the time we finish, which is
But
not
you're not going to go
trivial.
from like 130 to 500.
That would be an entirely a different program altogether. That would outstrip our capacity to hire teaching fellows to support the class. At least as we think about the program today, where we know we need to have these small group supports and access to instruction beyond just lecture, enrolling 500 people in a class would, I think, be an overwhelming challenge.
Yeah.
Not to say that it couldn't be done at some point.
So this is sort of interesting because, I work with a lot of companies, and when they go online, they take their product online, they think all of a sudden everybody in the world, is a potential customer, and everybody you have this sort of completely unconstrained potential. And what I'm hearing you saying is that no, we don't unconstrain it. We're going to, maybe admit 50% more than we would, but we're not going to, admit 5 times what we would, partially because of the resources that you still have to give to those people. I would imagine also part of it is because you just don't want to endanger the business model, because if you start sending people out that have LaunchCode credentials and they end up on the jobs and fail,
Yeah,
then the employers are going to shut their doors. So you're actually taking a huge risk by, changing the process too radically from one that's working. Is
sure.
that a
No, I think
constraint?
those are all very, very astute observations. I think, the other piece is, um, there's always a little bit of, there's always a lot of figuring around, hey, what's our responsibility and what's our best practice with regard to matching the amount of people we try and move through our programs to the amount of demand that we can put our hands on in the market space for these people. And when I say
Yeah.
demand, I recognize that there is huge demand in the world, all of which we do not have access to, right? So at some level, in some ways, as we think about this economic downturn, and which we don't know when it's going to turn back, it's a perfect opportunity for someone who's been laid off, or someone who's thinking about changing careers, to take this moment to go through a training process, and that can create some more people who we could bring in. At the same time, we also know that right now, as we just discussed, there's a fewer opportunities in general for us
Yeah.
to place people into, and we don't know when that is going to change. So there is the risk that, you grab more people in to the funnel, you get them through, and then come December, God forbid, if things are still sort of at the bottom of the trough, there's not a great opportunity for those people to step out into jobs, which, maybe may just be a reality. And I think it's worth providing the education anyway. But it does change the context of the work, and the length that you have to look out in order to see the ultimate positive outcome, which is what we want to see.
Would you imagine that LaunchCode as an organization is going to be the one that is going to be one of those sort of weird companies that actually benefits from the current upheaval? I mean, I could imagine a scenario where um, all of a sudden companies are even more desperate to get online resources stood up. So they're going to need programmers. We're a source of programmers. We figure out how to train more efficiently because we have to, because we no longer can run people into classes.
Yeah.
We get that innovation stack running, and then all of a sudden, we emerge 6, 8, 3 months from now, who knows, with a business model that all of a sudden, sort of perfectly fits a radically changed world. Is
I hope so.
that
I hope
something
so.
you're hoping,
I think
or
that's
like?
I think that's plausible, and I hope so. Look, I think there's lots of factors that go into the stock pot here, and to try and sort them all out is somewhat difficult. I do think, at the most at the greatest level of, uh, abstraction, what we see today and what we see happening is points, I think, directly at one of LaunchCode's missions, which is about how do you take people um, who are tech savvy and who are tech interested and who have the aptitude and willingness to succeed, but are stuck in, low wage, retail, service sector, food and beverage jobs. We see what the potential outcomes of being stuck in a job like that are right today, as we see 10 million people file for unemployment and entire industries decimated, right? And so I think it points to the importance of, how do you take people who are in this category and provide accessible ways for them to move into roles that are less likely to be disrupted by these economic shocks. So,
Okay.
at a high level of abstraction, I think it points at LaunchCode as a really important thing going forward. I think, at a slightly slightly lower level of abstraction, some of the things that you talk about, I do think and hope that, you will see this spur employers to continue to think differently about how they invest in their present workforce and how they bring people into their organizations. And I think LaunchCode is really well situated. And I'll use the example of the project that I sort of referenced obliquely before, in Philadelphia, which is a small engagement with Comcast. They're a great partner, who said to themselves, hey, we've got 60,000 people in customer service jobs that, many of which are disappearing by virtue of technology and changing times. And we've got 10,000 people in applications development, and we need twice as many people in that realm. How can we find 12 people from our customer service roles that we can, who are high quality people who we like, who we can train quickly to do
Did you
those?
say 12?
12 for now, right? Yeah,
Okay.
12.
So they got
Right.
they need 10,000 more,
That's
and they're
that's
starting
where
with
they
12.
start. Well,
Okay.
but I think, right, but I think that part of why LaunchCode is well positioned potentially to to do exactly what you're talking about, is because I think more employers will be situated to understand the value of investing and doing things like that. And I think for them, it's a matter of, hey, can we do this as a test run of doing 12 people? But then how do we do 15 or 20? And how do we start those things every quarter so that we're creating this other pipeline of 100 or 200 people in our own organization over time? And I think, and LaunchCode is really well situated to do those things by virtue of having a mechanism for determining who are good people from a fit standpoint and from an aptitude standpoint to get this training, who can then be successful in these roles, and then deploying these trainings in a way that's kind of atypical, in a way
Yeah.
that can successfully allow people to move into those roles, and in a way that de-risks the whole process for companies. So I think there's lots of opportunities there. I do think that the other piece that you mentioned that I'll just follow on is, I think that employers and corporate America will, I mean, they're already doing this, I think, but I think they'll recognize, hey, we're at the mercy in many ways of conditions in a way that's really, really frightening. And one way that they can hedge against that is by moving more of their services, more of their products, and making more of themselves accessible via online platforms and what have you, right? And I think employers are making that recognition right now, and I think many of them are just sort of in a moment of stasis, in April of 2020, about, hey, what are things going to look like? How long is this lag going to last? But I think the innovative ones and the first movers are going to say, now is the time where we start to bring in even more people so that we can prepare ourselves for the next shock, whatever it is, whether it's pandemic or just other changes that push online even more to the forefront. So, and I think we're well situated by virtue of our ability to scale these classes in a way that will help us thrive and succeed.
There's certainly going to be another shock in the future. Um, Interestingly, one of the odd parallels that I noticed when I was researching my book was that all of these world-changing companies that I studied all had some sort of calamity or multiple calamities. Like the biggest bank in the world was perhaps not coincidentally founded a year before the great San Francisco earthquake in San Francisco, and when the earthquake burnt half the city to the ground and leveled all the other banks, somehow these guys were the first out of the ashes. And literally 2 days after the quake, while the buildings were still smoking, they started lending money again. And you see this pattern again and again and again. And it's funny because I never thought of that as a pattern, but when I went back and looked at my own data, what I realized was that, yeah, there are going to be these constant disruptions. We're living through one now, but it's not like this is the end of that.
Sure.
And usually those disruptions, in the case of world-changing companies, is part of their founding story. So let's talk about what it's like to run a nonprofit in a world like today, because my wife is on the board of another nonprofit called the Magic House. And this is an event space for kids. You go and you bring your kid, and it's a fantastic space. And it's completely shut right now.
Yes.
And they are, I think they're getting some sort of aid package through the government, and UMB Bank is facilitating that. Evidently, UMB Bank is doing a really good job with them. What are your other nonprofit? Well, first of all, how is LaunchCode doing as a nonprofit? And then, since you're in touch with all these other nonprofit leaders around town, how's the nonprofits sector itself weathering the storm?
Yeah, it's a really interesting moment, and I think because the number and type of nonprofits in this region and across the country are as varied as companies are broadly. It's a really
don't
different
lump them all together.
situation.
Yeah.
But I think one of the big questions is, particularly to the degree that there are nonprofits that are largely dependent upon philanthropic sources of funding. The question very much becomes, how do you communicate to and with philanthropic funders at this point in time? And what are the messages and what are the things that your typical philanthropic funders really want to see and fund at this moment? And so, as you'd expect, largely these are things that are about crisis response and what have you. And in many ways, if you're relying on philanthropic funding sources and you're not in position to actually provide like emergency response stuff in the time of COVID, you're in a tough spot with regard to bringing in money. So I think there are plenty of
So
nonprofits.
nonprofits that have a business model that basically is the annual gala. I mean, it's a good cause. It's a good cause, but it's
Sure.
not COVID related, and they can't have the gala anymore. So those guys are hurting.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a tough place to be because, you
What do
don't
you
want
do
to
if
be.
you're running one of those? Like, let's say I run it. Let's say I'm running Stray Rescue. Stray Rescue is a fantastic program.
Sure.
It saves little dogs, right? Saves the dogs,
Sure.
and everyone loves saving little dogs. And so, Stray Rescue, I've supported them for years. We've had fundraisers for them over at the Glass Studio. But hey, the dogs don't seem to be front and center anymore. So
Well, look, I would say, I mean, this is all
what do
made
you
up
do?
on the fly here, and I probably would be doing a terrible job. But I would, if you're stray rescue, the services that you provide to animals don't disappear. The animals are still there. They didn't turn them all loose into the street, I presume, that they care for, they look after. So a need still exists, which is, I think, a key theme to funders. And then I would probably also speak to people about how in this moment when we're cooped up at home, our pets and our animals are as important, if not more important to us now as they
Yeah,
ever
I kind
were.
of wish I had a dog. Yeah,
Yeah. And
yeah.
so I think you have to find your niche. I think for us, it's been very much touching back, um, to the degree that we still need to go out and talk to our funders, which we do because they need to know what we're doing. We talk about the same thing I talked about a moment ago, which is about the even more acute applicability of our mission to the changes that are taking place in the country today. It is now extremely apparent to everyone that if someone is out there making $11 an hour at a fast food restaurant, that they are on the cusp. They probably already are in the mouth, in the maw of poverty and difficulty, but they are on the cusp of true decimation the instant that anything like this hits. And so
Yeah.
finding a way and an avenue for people to genuinely access middle class opportunity is even more important than ever. And I think given the shock and given the increase in unemployment, a key part of our message again is, hey, we provide these things, we provide them for free. Even more people than ever are going to need them now, and we need more resource in order to reach those people who are looking for it. So I think there's always a message that speaks to what people are feeling, and it speaks to the moment. For some places, it's just going to be harder than others. I do think that we feel well positioned in this moment, in part because of what you talked about before, the business model of having an earned revenue stream that covers a huge proportion of what we do, and the
Yeah,
fact
so
that
LaunchCode's not a normal nonprofit. It's we we
it's
are we are sort of abnormal in a lot of ways. And look, I expect there are probably going to be thousands of people that view this and say, yeah, well, it's nice if that's your circumstance, but it's not my circumstance. I'm running a small nonprofit. We're still doing good work, but our gala just got canceled. My donors are all hurting. They're all panicking. Um, they're going away, and I've got a staff to support. Um, have you heard about the bank loan programs? Are those
yeah,
working right now?
sure,
I
sure.
mean,
So
month
you
in.
know so yeah, we talked a lot, and we tracked as they went through the legislative process in Congress, just how things were evolving and what it was going to look like. And so we've been in contact all through this process with the folks who do our banking, and they've been good partners in helping us understand what things we could take advantage of and should take advantage of.
Have you
So
taken advantage of any of them?
we've applied for the 7A, the PPP program
Okay.
they call it, since we're in the sweet spot of organizations that are eligible for that. And so, but my impression from two arms lengths away is that any program that's put together very quickly, that has $367 billion in it, and where everybody is scrambling, thousands of people and
Yeah.
bankers and community lenders and businesses trying to understand what it all means, and you want to try and get the money out in 2 weeks, is going to have some challenges. And I think that's sort of what many folks are looking at now, as banks kind of make a rush for the cash window and try and figure out how to serve their clients and all of this. I see the Treasury Secretary has suggested another $250 billion infusion into that program already. So it does seem like a hard thing to administer that many dollars in a way that's effective. We're
Yeah.
hopeful that we can take advantage of that in a way that just provides additional sustenance for the organization, and allows us to the degree that we have to take any sort of more urgent measures, that we can forestall those measures well into the future.
Has laid off anybody? Any
We
of
have
our
not.
staff?
No, we have not.
Do you feel like any of the people that you have right now are redundant? In other words, that you're being nice by keeping them, but you don't really need them, given what's going on?
No, I think that we've tried to build a team and keep a team. Let me step back for a second. I think part of the reason why we are well situated to weather this storm is that we've been. It's not just about the fact that we earn revenue. That's certainly part of it, but we've been very conscious of building and operating reserve over time. And part of that is saying, hey, just because we can afford to take on $25,000 a month in additional payroll right now, or $50,000, that we don't have to do it just to grow in that way. And so, we've been able to put ourselves in a position where financially we can weather a shock, even if there's going to be an extended moment of reduced revenues and reduced activity, which is where we want to be. So I feel like we've tried very hard to make sure that we keep a team that's sized appropriately to the work that needs to be done and the people we need to serve.
So you're going to keep your whole team together because you've been fiscally conservative.
This is dependent and contingent in many ways on, look, to the degree that this is a 6 or 8 month thing where economic activity begins to return, and we see the green shoots popping up from the barren ground at Thanksgiving time. I think we're in great shape. Now, to the degree that you and I are sitting here having the second volume of this conversation in April of 2021, I think it's a different situation.
Well, I mean, look, things are changing. Like, I gave myself a haircut in the backyard yesterday. I mean, I don't know if you could see this. I'm sorry, this is a video chat. But like,
this is what we are. Listen,
I was sitting in the backyard, like I did when I was like a one-person startup, just shaving my head with a friggin' razor. It was like, things are different. You can't deny that things are pretty.
This is the one thing from this piece of content, Jim, that people are going to remember and carry away with them. Jim McKelvey giving himself a haircut in the backyard.
Bad haircut. I'll pan around for the camera. No, I mean, like, but it's true, because I need a haircut. Can't go to the place that's closed, and even if I did, my wife would kill me. She wasn't willing to wield the knife, so it was either me or the 9-year-old.
Desperate.
My shot.
Desperate times. Yeah.
But no, people. I mean, not to make light of this, people are having their lives upended. LaunchCode has a mission to give a pathway to a great job. How do I know if I'm somebody who has that passion and just happen to be laid off now, so this is a great opportunity to do LaunchCode, or somebody who has been, who wouldn't make it? Like, is there a way that I could tell if I should be doing it or not?
I suspect that if you're in that situation, you're the person who's laid off, your life has changed, your career has changed, and you start to go through a list of things. You pull up a list of job openings or whatever, and you kind of make it through, and you get to software developing, and you say, yeah, maybe I could do that, right? I was good at math. You're probably not the person that's going to be successful. If you get fired from your job and you say, you know what, I'm actually kind of glad about this, because I always hated doing executive assistant work, and what I really always wanted to do was build an application for my iPhone that does such and such a thing, right? Like, if the first thing that pops into your head when you are faced with this unexpected gap in your pathway is, I got to figure out how to do something in technology, you're probably going to be a really good fit for one of LaunchCode programs. And which is not to say, look, I don't want to tell a falsehood here, which is that every single person who has been successful at LaunchCode is someone who just lives, breathes technology. It is entirely possible that there are people who are just really, really good at it and intuitive for it, and maybe they just sort of like it, but that intuitive gift that they have for it allows them to carry through. But what we want to do is provide a pathway that says to people, you don't have to be gifted in this. You just have to have a level of aptitude that's commensurate with being able to be successful. And then you have to care a lot about getting through it and wanting to do it, right? And those things can exist in slightly different balances, I think. So if you just sort of are considering 8 different things and you throw them all in a pot and you pull out software developer and you say, all right, maybe you're probably not the person for launch code. But if you, while you were off the first week laid off, you took apart your router in your house because it wasn't working and you really needed to get online to see Tiger King, then that probably is the person who's going to be good at launch code, because you're curious, you have this technical bent, and you're always wanting to learn more and show yourself how to do it.
Okay, so I should become a hairdresser because
Well, it's okay
first
to it's
opportunity I
okay
take
to
to slip
tinker
into
and
my job.
dabble.
Okay, I get it. I get it. Okay, one last question, Jeff, then I'll let you go. One of the issues with Launch Code is that it's a regional program. So we've got, half a dozen regions, but let's say I live in Chicago where Launch Code doesn't have anything right now. And I'm laid off in Chicago and I hear this message and I think, well, normally I would have to commute to St. Louis, twice a week to go to this study session. They're doing the study session online. I've got the passion. I'm a perfect candidate for Launch Code, but I live in Chicago. And let's say, furthermore, that I'd be willing to move to one of these cities where Launch Code employers are
Sure.
hiring. So afterwards, you're going to pick up and go to St. Louis or Philly or one of these other cities. But let's say that's on the table too, because we have had people move
Yes,
for the
we
Launch
have.
Code program. I remember our very first program, there was a lady that moved in from Arizona. She dragged her husband out here, and I thought she was crazy, but it turns out, no, she was just committed,
Right. Yeah,
and I was super impressed with her. So let's say I'm one of these people.
sure.
Uh, has this massive upheaval that we're going through given me a new opportunity? In other words, is that person welcome in a Launch Code LC 101 class where they wouldn't normally be, or is there some,
It's a great question, one that we haven't
yeah,
grappled with a lot directly, because we still push out and advertise for applications for this class regionally. So if you're in Chicago, you're not likely to see an ad for Facebook for Launch Code LC 101 St. Louis on your Facebook feed when you go through, which you will see if you're in St. Louis. I think to the degree, and the other just very technical thing to be aware of here, this St. Louis class, which we are starting remotely and online in May, we are hopeful that by the time August rolls around, that we're in a position to move back to in-person classes. So we will move these classes from remote to in-person to the degree that environment has changed enough to allow us to feel good about doing that. So I would share that with the person from Chicago on the front end, and I would say, hey, listen, if you're somebody who already has skills and you're interested in trying to figure out in this difficult time how and where to find a job, apply for a Launch Code apprenticeship. We always have found people who have skills in other places and sometimes have employer partners, even though they may not be in St. Louis, who are looking to hire, who we might be able to match you up with. In terms of the skilling opportunity, if somebody is a right fit and meets all the criteria and is in Chicago and wants to start an online program, I think we would take a hard look at that. I don't want to fill a class with Chicagoans, but I think
nobody
that
does.
for but for a person who is committed enough to want to try and give that a try, I think we would open the door and consider it.
Okay, that's great. Jeff, any last words? And
No, thanks for doing this. I think this moment, it's really critical that people just talk with one another and think about what everybody is doing and how people are approaching the challenges we face. We're all facing the same environmental challenges, but the application to our particular lives and businesses is really different. And it's refreshing to hear people talk about what they're doing. So thanks for doing it. Thanks for having the conversation with Doug last time. I found that to be enlightening, and appreciate you taking the time with me today.
thank you, Jeff. All right.